The Gate, 27 miles north of Azusa. State Route 39 ends at a locked gate. The highway was planned in the 1930s as a vital link between California's coastal regions and the San Gabriel Mountains. Construction stretched across decades, pieces built in 1936, more in 1961. The canyon segment finally completed in the early 1960s under President Eisenhower's National Highway Initiative. It was supposed to be a continuous state route, a ribbon of asphalt connecting Beach Boulevard at the Pacific Coast all the way to the Angeles Crest Highway at Islip Saddle, 50 miles through Orange and Los Angeles counties. Instead, it's what Caltrans spokesman Patrick Chandler called essentially a 27-mile-long cul-de-sac. The numbers tell you what kind of failure this is. A 4.4-mile segment from post mile 40.0 to 44.4 in the Angeles National Forest has been closed to public traffic since 1978. Not under construction. Not temporarily closed. Closed. For 46 years and counting, an estimated 3 to 4 million people use SR 39 annually to access trails, campgrounds, river bends, and off-road vehicle areas in the San Gabriel Mountains. They drive up from Azusa, wind through the canyon, pass the reservoirs and dams, reach Crystal Lake, and then they hit the gate. Beyond it, the road continues, but you can't use it. Emergency vehicles only. The pavement is there, crumbling and rock-strewn, passable on foot or bike where it hasn't washed into the canyon, but off-limits to the public. The promise was connectivity. The reality is a dead end. And the gap between those two things is where SR 39 has existed for nearly half a century. The promise, State Route 39, exists because California's Streets and Highways Code says it should. The designation State Highway carries specific obligations: continuous routing, public access, maintained pavement, reliable connection. When California added SR 39 to the state system and signed it in 1934, the implicit contract was clear. This road would stay open, would be maintained, would provide the through connection its designation implied. The highway was part of California's massive expansion of state routes in the 1930s. In 1933, the legislature amended the State Highway Classification Act of 1927, adding 6,700 miles of county roads to the state system. Nearly doubled overnight, California's highway network grew to 14,000 miles, with new route numbers assigned from 80 to 202. SR 39 was among them, planned to run from Route 1 near Huntington Beach all the way to Route 2 near Wrightwood, connecting the Pacific Coast to the Angeles Crest Highway through 50 miles of Orange and Los Angeles counties. The route was geographically essential. The San Gabriel Mountains form a massive barrier north of Los Angeles, a rugged wall of peaks and canyons that separate the densely populated basin from the high desert communities beyond. SR 39 was designed to pierce that barrier, providing access not just for recreation, but for the infrastructure hidden in those mountains. Los Angeles County's flood control dams on the San Gabriel River, U.S. Forest Service facilities deep in the Angeles National Forest, fire suppression staging areas, search and rescue access points. Construction began in earnest in 1936. The Morris Dam was completed in 1934, followed by the San Gabriel Dam in 1939, both critical pieces of L.A. County's water and flood management system. Access to those dams wasn't optional. It was operational necessity. The highway climbed along the canyon wall, passing both reservoirs. An interesting footnote. From the 1940s through the 1990s, the Navy used Morris Reservoir for underwater missile testing, turning a flood control lake into a weapons research facility. But SR 39 wasn't the only planned connection through the San Gabriels. there was supposed to be another route, East Fork Road, intended to provide an alternate path from the Los Angeles area to the high country. Construction began in 1936, and workers built a magnificent single-arch concrete bridge over the East Fork of the San Gabriel River. Then, nature intervened. In February and March 1938, 2 Pacific storms hit Southern California simultaneously. A year's worth of rain fell in days. The Los Angeles flood of 1938 was catastrophic. The water swept through the San Gabriel Canyon with such force that it destroyed everything in its path. East Fork Road was obliterated. The only thing that survived was the bridge, standing intact over a river that had just proven it could destroy anything humans built nearby. Reconstruction was abandoned entirely. The bridge became a monument to ambition-meeting geology. Today, it's known as the Bridge to Nowhere, accessible only via a 10-mile round-trip hike through terrain still subject to floods, landslides, and rockfall. It's become a popular destination for adventurers, despite, or because of, the deaths that occur regularly in the area, mostly attributed to the swift and rapidly rising water of the San Gabriel River. The failure of East Fork Road made SR 39 even more critical. With one planned route destroyed before completion, the surviving highway had to carry the full burden of mountain access. The northern connection to SR 2 was finally completed in the early 1960s, construction ordered directly by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1957 as part of the National Highway Initiative. It took decades to build because the terrain was notoriously difficult to navigate. When it finally opened, SR 39 became one of the most scenic drives in California, a winding mountain road climbing through Angeles National Forest, offering views so spectacular that drivers couldn't help pulling over at the frequent viewpoints. By the 1970s, SR 39 had become what mountain highways become, a lifeline for the communities that depend on it, a recreational corridor for millions of visitors, and a maintenance burden for the agency responsible for keeping it open. The route created a loop up SR 39 from Azusa, across to SR 2 at Islip Saddle, then back down to La Cañada Flintridge. Scenic, popular, and fragile. The baseline promise was simple. When you drive onto a state highway, the road continues. State routes don't just stop, they connect. That's the definition, until they don't. What made SR 39 essential was concentration. One paved corridor pulled everything through a narrow canyon system. Recreation traffic and heading to campgrounds and trails, emergency services accessing remote areas, county workers maintaining flood control infrastructure, Forest Service crews managing hundreds of thousands of acres of national forest. The highway funneled all of that activity into a single route because geography left no alternative. The San Gabriel Mountains don't offer multiple easy passages. You either have a road or you don't. That concentration created utility. Caltrans explicitly frames the benefits of SR 39 around emergency response and access. Fire suppression when wildfires erupt in the national forest, search and rescue operations when hikers get lost or injured, evacuation routes when fires block other exits. Steve Castro, executive director of the Azusa Chamber of Commerce, has been advocating for the road's reopening for nearly 25 years. For 3 million to 4 million visitors every year, he said, describing the recreational traffic that uses the accessible portion. Azusa Mayor Robert Gonzalez, who has been pushing Caltrans and legislators for 17 years to get the road fixed, understands the emergency access problem viscerally. If you are deep in the canyon, say at Crystal Lake, and there is a fire, you may not be able to get out, he said. Or emergency services may not be able to get to you. That is a concern. The highway became iconic. When Universal Pictures needed a location for the climactic mountain race in The Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift 2006. They filmed on SR-39, the switchbacks, the canyon walls, the dramatic drops. The movie pretended the road was in Japan, complete with a Japanese gate in the opening shot, but viewers who knew the area recognized the San Gabriel Dam visible in the background. The treacherous mountain pass where Sean and DK raced to settle their rivalry wasn't anywhere near Tokyo. It was right here, in the densely wooded mountains of Southern California. That cinematic attention reflected reality. When the road was fully open, it was considered one of the most scenic drives in the United States. The views were extraordinary. Pull over at any of the frequent viewpoints, and you could look out over canyon after canyon, ridgeline after ridgeline, so high up you could touch the clouds. It's hard to believe you're less than 20 miles from one of the most populated areas in the country. The highway became indispensable, precisely because it was the only route. When everything depends on one road, that road can't be optional. But concentration creates a trap. You can't abandon what people depend on, but you also can't escape the costs of maintaining it. And SR-39's costs were high. The road cuts through some of the most geologically unstable terrain in Southern California. The San Gabriel Mountains are young, steep, and actively eroding. Landslides are chronic. Rockfall is constant. Even today, when you walk the closed section, you can hear pebbles trickling down the slopes, small rocks dislodging and bouncing across the pavement. Seasonal floods wash out drainage systems. Wildfires burn through the forest, destabilizing slopes and leaving behind ash that turns to mud in the first rain. The area experiences extreme snow levels, avalanches, and rock slides that can close the road for weeks. Some portions of the road look stable until you examine the hillside and realize entire trees have been dislodged, lying sideways, roots exposed, growing out of fractured rock that doesn't look firm at all. It gives you a visceral understanding of why this highway had to close down. Caltrans spends approximately $1.5 million annually maintaining the accessible portion of SR-39, just for the 27 miles that are open. That's routine maintenance, clearing rockfall, repairing drainage, patching pavement, managing erosion. It doesn't include major reconstructions or the closed segment. The weapon was access concentration. The hidden cost was permanent vulnerability. SR-39 works as long as nothing goes catastrophically wrong. But in the San Gabriel Mountains, catastrophic isn't an anomaly. It's geology. Here's the operating belief that locked SR-39 into its current state. Keep it serviceable, not solvable. Caltrans inherited a maintenance problem with no clean solution. The road was already there, already part of the state highway system, already essential to emergency services and recreation. But fully stabilizing it, building the kind of protective infrastructure that would make the route truly reliable, was expensive, politically complicated, and environmentally contentious. So the system found an equilibrium. Patch what you can, keep emergency access functional, avoid the massive commitment of a full reconnection. After the 1978 rock slides closed the northern segment, Caltrans eventually opened it as a service road for emergency crews. They did minimal stabilization work, restored culverts, added berms, created a narrow shoulder that fire trucks and sheriff's vehicles could use. It was passable barely for the people who absolutely needed it. Everyone else was locked out. This approach was rational within the constraints Caltrans faced. A study in 2003 determined that reopening the road wouldn't significantly harm the environment, so the agency allowed limited emergency use. That satisfied the immediate operational needs, fire suppression, search and rescue, without triggering the full costs and risks of public reopening, but it created a structural stalemate. The road existed in a kind of limbo, closed to the public, open to emergencies, degrading slowly. Still Caltrans' responsibility. Nobody had to make the big decision, spend hundreds of millions to fully rebuild it, or formally abandon it and face the legal and political consequences. Instead, the system just waited. The philosophy wasn't neglect. It was risk management through inaction. As long as Caltrans could keep the emergency access functional, the pressure to resolve the closure remained manageable. Local officials complained, recreationists grumbled, but the status quo held. Then the constraints started tightening. The modern project alternatives formalized the tension Caltrans had been navigating for decades. No build, accept existing conditions, maintain emergency access only, let the public segment remain closed. Minimum build, upgrade for evacuation and emergency use, but keep public traffic restricted. Recreation access, allow bikes and shuttles, limited public use. Full opening, reconstruct the segment with major protective structures, viaducts for debris flow mitigation, rock catchment walls, rock sheds, soldier pile retaining walls, continuous barrier fencing. Estimated cost, $335 million. The cheap option was $37 million. The full option was nearly 10 times that. Both required navigating environmental regulations, Forest Service permits, endangered species protections, and public hearings. Every alternative carried consequences. Every choice was expensive. And every delay made the problem worse as the closed segment continued degrading, rockfall buried drainage systems, and slopes eroded further. This is tragedy logic. The system finds a position where nobody has to finish the road, but everyone is still responsible for the consequences. Caltrans can't abandon it because other agencies won't take it. The county and Forest Service deem the route essential, but won't assume the financial burden. So the road stays broken and the agency stays stuck. The warning wasn't subtle. It was chronic. Caltrans' own documentation is blunt. The segment has been regularly damaged by landslides, flooding, falling rocks, and forest fires since the 1978 closure. This isn't a one-time disaster, followed by decades of stability. It's recurring failure, year after year, winter after winter. The geology doesn't cooperate. The slopes are too steep, the bedrock too fractured, the soil too loose. When it rains, rocks fall and drainage systems clog. When it burns, the slopes destabilize and the next rain brings mudslides. When it snows, the freeze-thaw cycle breaks pavement apart. The road is built in terrain that actively rejects infrastructure. But the clearest warning flare came in 2012, when the system's equilibrium finally broke down. Caltrans, facing budget pressures and escalating maintenance costs, proposed abandoning the entire segment north of Azusa, not just the closed 4.4 miles, but everything beyond the city limits. The agency tried to transfer responsibility to either the U.S. Forest Service or Los Angeles County. The logic was straightforward. If the road is too expensive for the state to maintain and too essential for the state to abandon, maybe someone else should own the problem. Both agencies refused. The Forest Service said it would only accept the road if Caltrans returned it to a wild state, meaning remove all pavement, restore the landscape, undo the infrastructure. That would cost more than reconstruction. Los Angeles County declined for financial reasons. They couldn't afford to maintain what Caltrans couldn't afford to maintain. The handoff attempt revealed the governance trap. You can't just walk away from a state highway. Abandonment requires permits, environmental review, possibly full restoration of the landscape. Legal obligations and permit interpretations suggested that abandoning the road could mean tearing it out entirely, an outcome nobody wanted and nobody could afford. So Caltrans was stuck with it. The road remained in the state system. The agency kept spending $1.5 million annually on the accessible portion, while the closed segment continued degrading, and the public kept asking the same question: when will you fix it? Azusa Mayor Robert Gonzalez captured the exhaustion and skepticism perfectly when Caltrans announced yet another round of public hearings in 2024. We have been on this road before, no pun intended. I hope Caltrans is legitimately looking to do something. 17 years of advocacy, multiple promises to reopen, plans announced then scuttled, money allocated then redirected. Each time the same pattern: initial optimism, environmental studies, cost escalation, project cancellation. The warning wasn't ignored. It was acknowledged, studied, reported, and then left unresolved because every solution was too expensive or too complicated or too politically fraught. The poison moment for SR 39 wasn't a disaster. It was a phrase. Essentially, a 27-mile-long cul-de-sac. That's how Caltrans spokesman Patrick Chandler described the highway in 2012, and the phrase stuck because it distilled the betrayal into 6 words. A state route is supposed to connect. That's the entire point. Highways go somewhere. They link communities, provide through traffic, create corridors. A cul-de-sac is what you build in a subdivision. It's a dead end by design. SR 39 is a dead end by failure. The iconic image is the gate. Orange metal barrier, road closed signs, pavement continuing beyond it into the forest. You can see where the road goes. You just can't use it. For decades, that gate has represented the gap between promise and reality, between what a state highway is supposed to be and what SR 39 actually is. Representative Grace Napolitano, who has been advocating for the highway's reopening for 20 years, put the frustration plainly. It is a highway. It is supposed to be open. The simplicity of that statement is what makes it powerful. There's no technical jargon, no complex engineering explanation, just the basic expectation that a road designated as a state highway should function as a state highway. When it doesn't, when it ends at a gate 4.4 miles short of its designated terminus, the system has failed its most fundamental obligation. For the communities that depend on SR 39, the betrayal is more than symbolic. Azusa sees all the traffic, 3 to 4 million visitors annually, driving up into the mountains and then coming back down the same way because there's nowhere else to go. We see the traffic, Mayor Gonzalez said. We see the impacts on the roads. We see all that. If that was to open up, then that would alleviate some of that. Folks may want to go all the way through. The economic impact is real. Azusa's Chamber of Commerce has calculated what reopening could mean. Visitors from La Cañada Flintridge could drive east on SR 2, turn south on SR 39, and end up in Azusa. First-time visitors who might stop at a restaurant, shop at the Target, spend money in a city that currently sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, instead of in the middle of a mountain loop. But the deeper poison is the erosion of trust. When a state agency promises to reopen a highway, studies it, allocates funding, then cancels the project and redirects the money elsewhere, and repeats that cycle multiple times over decades, people stop believing the promises. In 2011, Caltrans opened SR 39 to Crystal Lake Road after repairs, announcing the project to fix the remaining segment would begin soon. Then, the agency killed the project, citing rising costs and risks to Nelson's bighorn sheep. In 2022, Caltrans announced it was reconsidering reopening. Public meetings were held. Environmental impact reports were drafted. In 2024, more public hearings, more environmental reviews, more cost estimates, $335 million for full reopening, $37 million for emergency access only. Gonzalez's skepticism, we have been on this road before, isn't cynicism. It's pattern recognition. The system keeps studying the problem without solving it. The road stays closed, the gate stays locked, and the promise of a continuous state highway remains unfulfilled. The spiral began in winter 1978. heavy rainfall triggered a massive rock slide on the northernmost 4.5 miles of SR 39 near Crystal Lake. But this wasn't a typical slide that dumps debris across the roadway. This was catastrophic. The slide tore away large portions of the highway itself, sending pavement, culverts, and drain pipes down into the valley below. Some sections were stripped down to bare dirt. Others simply vanished into the canyon. The road didn't just get blocked, it got partially destroyed. Caltrans closed the segment immediately. It was supposed to be temporary, clear the debris, rebuild the damaged sections, stabilize the slope, reopen the road. Standard mountain highway maintenance. It's been 46 years. The road had always been vulnerable to landslides. It had been temporarily closed several times before 1978 for rockfall and debris clearing. But this storm was different. The damage was structural, not superficial. Some engineers called it shoddy construction, but that's unfair to the builders. The real problem was the environment. Slopes too steep, bedrock too fractured, soil too loose. The road was built in terrain that fundamentally rejects infrastructure. After the closure, Caltrans initially tried to hand the road off. In 1990, the agency restored some culverts and added berms, then offered the closed portion to the U.S. Forest Service. The Forest Service declined unless the road was returned to a wild state, meaning complete removal and landscape restoration. That would cost more than rebuilding, so the handoff failed. Then the road got hit again. During the 1997 to 98 El Niño, another rockslide damaged sections that were being studied for reconstruction. The pattern was clear. This wasn't a one-time event. The geology was actively hostile to infrastructure. In 2003, Caltrans completed a study determining that reopening the road wouldn't significantly harm the environment. Based on that finding, the agency reopened the segment as a service road for emergency use only. Fire crews, sheriff's department, maintenance workers, they could use the degraded pavement. Everyone else stayed locked out. For nearly a decade, that compromise held. Then, in 2005, another major rockslide damaged more of the roadbed. Caltrans repaired enough to keep emergency access functional, but the public segment remained closed. By 2009, the agency had announced plans to fully rehabilitate and reopen the highway. The project was funded. $43.36 million allocated in the 2008 State Highway Operation and Protection Program. Construction was scheduled to begin in fiscal year 2010 to 11. 2 retaining walls were built near Azusa in 2010. The project seemed real. Then it collapsed. In 2011, Caltrans reversed course. The agency cited rising costs, engineering challenges, and, critically, risks to Nelson's bighorn sheep, a fully protected species under California law. About 417 bighorns live in the highest slopes of the San Gabriel and San Bernardino Mountains. Because they're protected, any sheep injured or killed as a result of highway construction or operation would violate state law. Caltrans concluded it couldn't guarantee zero harm to the sheep, so it killed the project. The allocated money was redirected to a bridge project on Highway 1 in Northern California. For the people who had been waiting decades, the cancellation felt like betrayal. The project had been funded. Work had begun. Then the agency walked away. In 2012, Caltrans made the handoff attempt again, this time trying to transfer the entire segment north of Azusa, 27 miles, to either the county or the Forest Service. Both declined, leaving Caltrans stuck with a road it didn't want to maintain, but couldn't legally abandon. The death spiral entered a new phase, procedural limbo. The road stayed broken, but the system started treating reopening as a permanent process rather than a near-term goal. Environmental impact reports, scoping meetings, public hearings, draft alternatives, final alternatives, comment periods. In 2022, Caltrans announced, again, that it was reconsidering reopening. Virtual scoping meetings were held in December. The agency presented multiple alternatives, from no-build to full reconstruction. Community members testified. Local officials advocated. The process churned forward. In February 2024, Caltrans issued a draft environmental impact report for rehabilitating and reopening the 4.4-mile segment. The preferred alternative: full reconstruction with resurfacing, retaining walls, rock catchment walls, viaducts for debris flow mitigation, a rock shed, and continuous barrier fencing. Estimated cost: $335 million. A lower cost evacuation route alternative: $37 million with paving, 6 retaining walls, and drainage upgrades. Public hearings were scheduled for April 2024. Mayor Gonzalez tempered his response. "It is always important to hear all sides. While I'm glad they are holding this, I'm taking a realistic approach. Hopefully, it will have some legs." The spiral continues. The road degrades further each year. Rockfall buries drainage inlets. Slopes erode. Pavement cracks. The cost of eventual repair rises, and the system produces more reports, more meetings, more alternatives, while the gate stays locked and the highway remains a cul-de-sac. SR 39 still exists on maps. The designation is official. The route runs from Pacific Coast Highway in Huntington Beach to Islip Saddle on Angeles Crest Highway, 50 miles on paper, with a 4.4-mile gap in reality. Caltrans still maintains the accessible portions. Emergency crews still use the closed segment. The infrastructure is there, degraded, but present. But something unexpected happened. The closed road found a second life. Today, if you drive up SR 39 from Azusa, you wind through the canyon, pass Morris Dam, where the Navy once tested underwater missiles, continue past San Gabriel Dam, and eventually reach Crystal Lake. There's a small store there, camping supplies, a cafe, and yes, they absolutely lean into the Friday the 13th connection. The Crystal Lake Campground plays up the horror movie association, because when you have the same name as Jason Voorhees' fictional Murder Lake, why not? Just beyond the store, you reach the San Gabriel Canyon Road Lookout, the official end of the drivable portion. There's a parking area, a viewpoint with spectacular canyon views, and a locked gate with orange barricades and road closed signs. Beyond the gate, the pavement continues, and people walk it. The closed section has become one of Southern California's more unusual hiking and biking trails. You can walk or bike the Forbidden Highway, following its switchbacks and turns through the heart of Angeles National Forest, enjoying views so majestic you're literally up in the clouds. The pavement is in surprisingly good condition, better than some city streets, at least for the first mile or so. Weeds grow through cracks. Water runs across the road in places. But the surface is intact, smooth enough that cyclists use it regularly. As you go farther, the damage becomes more apparent. Boulders in the road, sections where rocks have accumulated, guardrails that look new, evidence that Caltrans does minimal maintenance for emergency access. More water flowing across the pavement. Areas where the hillside is visibly unstable, with rocks and dirt constantly trickling down. The northern end, near where it would connect to SR2, shows the worst damage. That's where the most extensive destruction occurred in 1978, and where subsequent slides in 1997 to 98 and 2005 caused additional failure. But even there, the road exists. You can follow it, you just can't drive it. And for now, you can't reach it from the north at all. As of 2024, SR2 is also closed in that area due to damage from winter storms, with repairs not expected for months. That means the closed section of SR 39 is even more isolated than usual, accessible only from the south, a dead-end trail into the mountains. What survives is partial functionality. the highway remains a critical access corridor for recreation and emergency response, just as Caltrans frames it. The 27 miles from Azusa to Crystal Lake carry millions of visitors annually. Fire crews use the road to stage suppression operations when wildfires erupt. Sheriff's helicopters use it for search and rescue staging. County workers access flood control dams. The Forest Service reaches remote areas of the national forest. The closed segment stays in the system enough to justify formal environmental reviews and public hearings. Caltrans continues studying alternatives, updating cost estimates, holding meetings. The process remains active even if progress doesn't. But something fundamental died, the promise of continuity. A state highway is supposed to connect. SR 39 doesn't. It terminates at a gate, 4.4 miles short of its designated endpoint, and that gap has existed longer than most of the people using the road have been alive. The betrayal isn't that the road closed in 1978. Mountain highways close during disasters. The betrayal is that it stayed closed for 46 years, while the system produced studies instead of solutions. The fantasy that infrastructure problems can be solved without environmental trade-offs died too. The highway can't be rebuilt without affecting Nelson's bighorn sheep habitat. Caltrans' own environmental documents explicitly identify impacts to protected species, collision risk, and habitat disruption as core constraints requiring mitigation. The sheep aren't a side issue, they're a design driver. Any solution that doesn't account for them isn't viable under California law. This is what infrastructure in the 21st century looks like. Every project navigates a web of environmental regulations, endangered species protections, jurisdictional boundaries, and budget constraints. The old model, build the road, maintain the road, assume the landscape accommodates you, doesn't work anymore. The landscape has rights now. The species have protections. And the costs of reconciling those competing claims are often too high for the system to bear. Steve Castro, the Azusa Chamber Director who has advocated for 25 years, remains hopeful. It would be a wonderful thing, he says about reopening. But hope is different from expectation. After decades of promises and cancellations, hope is what remains when trust is gone. For Mayor Gonzalez, the calculus is pragmatic. I'm cautiously optimistic with Caltrans revisiting this project, he said in 2022. 2 years later, facing another round of hearings, I hope Caltrans is legitimately looking to do something. The language has shifted from optimism to skepticism. He's measuring his words because he's seen this movie before. Representative Napolitano's position hasn't changed in 20 years. It is a highway. It is supposed to be open. That clarity is admirable and exhausting in equal measure. She's right. It is a highway. It should be open. But being right doesn't make the sheep disappear, or the rock slides stop, or the $335 million materialize. The bridge to nowhere still stands, a concrete arch over the east fork of the San Gabriel River, accessible via a 10-mile round-trip hike through terrain that regularly claims lives. It's a monument to the 1938 flood and a reminder that sometimes nature wins decisively. East Fork Road was abandoned after one catastrophic event. SR 39 has endured dozens of smaller catastrophes over 46 years, each one eroding the will to fix it. The lesson SR 39 teaches isn't motivational, it's structural and specific. When infrastructure sits inside a living landscape, maintenance isn't a cost line on a budget. It's a permanent negotiation with geology, fire, water, habitat, and jurisdiction. The San Gabriel Mountains don't accommodate roads out of courtesy. They tolerate them, barely, and charge a price in landslides and floods and fires. Caltrans can build retaining walls and rock sheds and viaducts. They can spend $335 million engineering solutions to debris flows and rockfall. But they can't make the mountains stable. They can't prevent the next fire from destabilizing slopes or the next El Niño from washing out drainage. They can only respond again and again to a landscape that refuses to stay fixed. The old SR-39 worked because the system accepted chronic failure as normal. Rock slides happened, crews cleared them, traffic resumed. The closure was supposed to be temporary, just another disruption in a long series of disruptions. Instead, it became permanent. Not because anyone decided it should be, but because resolving it was always slightly too expensive, slightly too risky, slightly too complicated. The costs kept rising. The environmental constraints kept tightening. The sheep became protected. The budget crises came, and the temporary closure became a 46-year stalemate. What remains is a gate, a gap, and a lesson. Sometimes the difference between a functioning highway and a cul-de-sac is 4.4 miles. And sometimes 4.4 miles is far enough that a system never closes the distance, not because it's impossible, but because every solution costs more than the system is willing to pay. SR-39 exists. It just doesn't go anywhere. And after 46 years, that stopped being a problem to solve and became a condition to manage. The gate stays locked. The hearings continue. The studies accumulate. The sheep graze on the closed pavement. And the highway remains exactly what Caltrans called it in 2012, essentially a 27-mile-long cul-de-sac, a promise written on maps, a reality blocked by a gate, a state route that ends before it finishes. The road to nowhere, still going nowhere, 46 years and counting.